So today we'll be starting this atomic and molecular structure, right? Now here you see there are several topics. Some of these might be known to you, some might be new, right? But almost all of the topics are also given in their MACOUT syllabus. I think only two topics are omitted from the MACOUT syllabus. That is this one. I think the molecular orbital equation for atomic and molecular orbitals are not included in your MACOUT syllabus. Anyway, I think it's better to do all of them, right? But today we'll start from the Schrodinger equation, the first topic of our this module, right? So before going into Schrodinger equation and establishing it, we'll just get an overview of the history or some aspects of the atomic structure that are prevalent before Schrodinger equation, that is before the quantum mechanical model, right? So what we see now as atomic structure is the wave mechanical quantum mechanical form, right? So wave mechanics is involved in that atomic structure. But before that structure, atomic structure was dealt in by various scientists in various ways, like see, just a minute. Yeah, so we can say that it all started with the Dalton structure. We all know, right? It started in 1804 with John Dalton proposing that atom is indivisible, right? So atom is something which you cannot be broken into any part, so cannot be divided further. So that is the atom. And this theory actually lasted for nearly 100 years till Thomson, J.J. Thomson, right, discovered what? He discovered electrons, right? And he said that these electrons are these negatively charged particles through his cathode ray experiment, and he proposed a model like that palm pudding model, right? So there is a positive charge, sea of positive charge, and these electrons are embedded like resins in the pudding, something like that, right? Now this structure, this atomic structure or this theory lasted only few years until what? In 1911, when Rutherford, due to his famous gold foil experiment, right? This you have already read in your previous classes. This his famous gold foil experiment, where he found out that most of the atomic part is void and all the positive charge is concentrated in the nucleus, right? So he termed it as nucleus, right? And the electrons are moving around here around the nucleus, like the solar system model, right? Now there was it was accepted, but soon it was found that that it is not possible for a negative charge to revolve around a positive charge without emitting energy, and eventually it would spiral down to the nucleus and destroy the stability. So Rutherford's model's drawback was could not explain the stability of atom. He could not explain the stability of these atoms, right? Then along with this, after a couple of years, Niels Bohr proposed his theory, right, quite arbitrarily, means intuitively he suggested that electrons is fine to have a Rutherford type of model unless and until that we propose some restrictions on the orbits, and he said that only electron can reside only in those orbits where mvr, that is the orbital momentum, angular momentum, is equals to the multiple of h by 2 pi, where h is the Planck's constant, right? And n can be the integers like 1, 2, 3. This you already read, and this is called the quantum number. He suggested it, right? So now we have a model, right? An electron can reside in these orbits who fulfill, that means their radius fulfill these conditions, and as long as he also proposed that as long as the electron reside here, they revolve around these orbits, they neither emit nor absorb nor emit energy, right? And electron can move from one orbit to another. You have to supply energy to move it to the higher orbital state, or they can emit energy and fall to the lower energy state only by this gap, right? So this is the amount of energy that is had to absorb or emit in order to travel between these two orbits, and more importantly that any electron cannot reside in between this. It is forbidden zone. Fine. But during the same time, if you see, that in 1900 another experiment was there, right? That is called, you might have heard, the black body radiation experiment. Radiation experiment. By whom? By Max Planck, right? Sorry, pardon me, I should write it. Okay, Max Planck. Now he suggested from this black body radiation experiment that the radiation or light or whatever the energy which is radiated from this black body, right, they have some particle nature, right? They are not continuous in nature, they comes in packets, and he said that these energy are in packets of h nu, where this is the frequency of that radiation and this is the smallest packet possible of energy. And during the same time Einstein was working on photoelectric effect, right? And he showed that from his photoelectric effect that this light or this radiation, right, they have what? They have corpuscular nature or particle nature. Right. So from these two groundbreaking experiment, we see that light or radiation does have some particle nature, which was actually considered only waves up to this time, right? Now it is seen that they have some particle properties as well. Fine. Now this is not our concern. Our concern is just the opposite, right? We will be discussing Schrödinger equation to see that the wave nature of particles, right? Now in 1924, right, de Broglie suggested that when he saw that this light have this corpuscular nature, he suggested that some matters or which are called that particles, right, particles which have mass and momentum, all these things, they can also have wave nature, right. Particles can also have wave nature, wave properties, right. Now this is the dual nature of these particles, right. So both wave and particle natures are possible. So now we have E equals to h nu from Planck and E equals to mc square from Einstein equation. Now if you combine this, we have h nu equals to mc square, where m is the mass of the particle and c is the velocity of light. Now nu is the frequency of radiation. Now again we know that nu is equal to c by lambda. So we can rearrange it like h equals to m into c by nu. So h equals to m c into lambda, right, or lambda equals to h by m into c, right. Now see, in this equation we have a lambda that is a property of wave, and we also have mass that is a property of particle, right. And this is the c velocity of light. Now de Broglie proposed that not only if it travels by the velocity of light, if any particle has a velocity v, then also this equation stands good, right. So he proposed that m into v. So the difference between these two equations is that the velocity of light is replaced by any other velocity of any particle, right. So this particle can be the velocity of a football, a volleyball, a cricket ball, or an electron, right. So we can calculate the velocity of the lambda if we know the mass and velocity of that particle. So a moving car, we can also calculate the lambda of it, right. So what de Broglie said, that any particle, if it moves with a velocity, will also have an associated wavelength. Now this was not just an hypothesis. So Davison and Germer independently, actually experimentally proved, right, experimentally proved this de Broglie's hypothesis, right. Right, when they showed that an beam of electron is diffracted, right. So just by following this equation, we can calculate the lambda of any of matter which have an associate velocity. So here you can see that the wavelengths which are calculated for various particles, right. See, in this column you see there are different types of particles, starting from electrons, which are very small, to a baseball or tennis ball, which is much larger, right. And the mass is also given here in grams, of course, right. The velocity in centimeter per second. If you put all these in the above equation, that is your what is that? Lambda equals to h by momentum, right? If you put this in your equation, you will see that you can calculate the values in this column, right? Now you see what is the difference between these things. See, for a baseball, the wavelength associated is calculated to be, these are of course average values. I mean, baseball, you can imagine that the ball is 140 grams, you can take 150 also, and the velocity, average velocity, say 2500 centimeter per second. If you put in all this in this de Broglie's equation, you can calculate a wavelength of near what, 10 to the power minus 32, right? 2 into 10 to the power minus 32 centimeter, right? It's very small. You can really imagine that 1 centimeter you are dividing it by 10 to the power 32 times, one part of it. So it's very small, right? But as you are going up, you see, as the mass is decreasing and the velocity is increasing, right? You see the wavelengths are also increasing, right? The wavelength is increasing in this order. For an electron, slow electron, you see that the associated wavelength is in the order of 10 to the power minus 2 centimeter, right? You can say that 10 to the power minus 2 is also very small. Yes, 10 to the power minus 2 is also very small, but is large enough when compared to the size of electron, right? Now these figures does not mean much when if you do not compare with the molecules here, right? Sorry, not molecules, the particles here, right? See, for a baseball, right, what is the size of a baseball? The size of a baseball is around, say, 10 centimeter, if I take it, right? 10 centimeter. So if it is 10 centimeter in diameter, right, and this lambda, you see, 10 to the power minus 32 centimeter, that means it is very small compared to this baseball, right? That means if you draw the wave of here of this baseball, you can draw number of wavelengths in this 10 centimeter, right? So compared to the size of baseball, the wavelength is very small, right? So the wave property is not significant, right? It does not matter, right? It has wave property or not, because even if it has wave property, it does not matter. Why? See, what does wave and particle, what is the basic difference of wave and particle? Particle cannot be present at two places at a single time, right? But wave can be present at two places, more than one place at the same time, isn't it? So if wave property was very significant for baseball or tennis ball, right, it would be very difficult to play, isn't it? Because you do not know where the ball will be. But as the wavelength is very small compared to the tennis ball or the baseball, right? So the wavelength actually is many times smaller than the length of the baseball itself, right? So even if it have wave properties, it does not matter much, because a size of the baseball actually covers lots of wavelength of it, right? Whereas if you now come to electron, slow electron, the wavelength is still smaller, 10 to the power minus 2, but very much large compared to the size of electron. That means if an electron is here, right, the wavelength is very big, right? So wavelength can be here, present here, as well as it can be present here, right? You cannot say at that time that where the electron is exactly is, right? It can be here also, it can be here also. So in one wavelength there you can place lot of electrons. I mean in one wavelength, that is 10 to the minus 2 centimeter, you can fit in number of electrons, right? So that's why this wave property of electron is very, very important. Okay. Okay, so this kind of examples or problems can come, that what problem maybe is written, is given the size of the ball or mass of the ball or velocity of the ball, and you are asked that is it significant, the velocity, or sorry, the wavelength. So this is why that wave properties are very significant only for very small particles, not for large particles. Okay. Now another thing, this Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, this is also you have read, right? It is impossible to determine precisely the simultaneously the momentum and position of particles like an electron, even in theory, right? This is a direct result of this de Broglie's hypothesis, right? See, there are two terms, precisely and simultaneously, right? If you do not want to measure precisely, you can do both simultaneously, and if you want to measure simultaneously, you cannot do it precisely, right? Simultaneously, what does it mean? You are measuring it at the same time, at the same moment you want to measure momentum and position, right? So Heisenberg principle says that if you want to measure them same time, you cannot do it precisely, means you cannot do it accurately. But if you want to measure it at different times, you can both determine it precisely, right? There is no problem with it. But you cannot do it at the same time, at the very accurately, both of them. You may have known it, this statement, and you may also know this mathematical form, right? So this is the uncertainty in position. If you multiply the uncertainty with the momentum, so it's P, right? And so this is greater than equal to h by 4 pi, right? So the derivation is not in the scope of this class, because you can get it in physics books, right? This derivation, it is not included here, so I am not going to it, but the results are important for us. Okay, now see, what does this mean? What does Heisenberg uncertainty principle physically mean? See, how do you see things, right? Not say, how do you right? The answer will be with your eyes. Okay, I agreed, right? So how do you see things? You may say that with my eyes. That again I will ask that what is the mechanism, right? So when you see things with your eyes, this means light is falling on that subject or object and is reflected back to your eyes, and there are some sensory organs, and that is capturing, right? So that is in not our part of discussion. We are just discussing that how we are seeing things, that if light is falling on a subject, suppose you are seeing the screen, right? Your mobile or laptop screen in front of you now. Why you are seeing it? Because either your screen is emitting the light which is going directly, or if it is not an emitting object, you are seeing the frame of the mobile itself, that some light is falling on it and getting reflected back to your light. So that is, you see the thing, that means you are seeing what? Its position, you are finding its position, right? Now if you want to see an electron, right, you have to have some light falling on it, right? Some light that has a frequency, if it has a frequency of nu, then it will have a energy associated h nu falling on it and getting reflected back to your eyes, right? And then you will be seeing it. Of course your eyes can see it, but let us say suppose any other instrument can do it, right? There are instruments who can measure the changes of these lights. Okay, now electron is very small. That means if you want to see this, the wavelength lambda has to be small. Lambda has to be very, very smaller than the electron, right? Otherwise you cannot see. The lambda itself has to be very small than the electron, right? See, you can understand this. Suppose if you want to see something with other light, right, that means the wavelength of the light is greater than the pen. Suppose you are looking at the pen and the wavelength of the light that you are watching it with is greater than the pen, the dimension of the pen, then what will happen? The pen cannot reflect it. The pen, if cannot reflect it, then it will not come back to your eye and you cannot see the pen, right? So same thing is the case with the electrons. If you want to see the electron, it has to be illuminated with some light which has wavelength smaller than the electron itself, otherwise you cannot see it. Now smaller the lambda, right, smaller the lambda, greater the frequency, that means greater the energy, right, higher will be the energy, right? So if you have some light which has wavelength lower than the electron, right, you can see the electron exactly and you can find the position exactly. Good, that means you can precisely determine the position. But as soon as you do that, the energy will be so high because the frequency is so high, very high. Now as the lambda is low, right, as the lambda is low, the frequency will be very high, right, very high, and as such the energy of the electron will be changed as soon as it collide with the electron. The frequency of the light will be so high that as soon as it approach or comes in contact with the electron, it will change the energy of the electron. Now as soon as the energy is changed, what will change? The momentum will change, mv, the momentum will change, and the momentum will change, that means you cannot measure the momentum simultaneously, precisely, right? So if you want to find the position, we have seen that we can do the find the position exactly by some light of smaller wavelength, but doing that you will lose on momentum, you cannot find the momentum. Now if you want to find the momentum exactly, you have to use low energy radiation. Now if you use low energy radiation, then the lambda will be very high. Now you cannot see the or find the position of the electron precisely. So this is the main theory behind Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and that's why it is said that it is impossible to determine precisely even in theory, right? We have just done nothing experiment, just we have discussed in theory. In theoretically also we cannot find the exact position and momentum of an electron, right? So this is what this Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is violated by Bohr's theory, right? Bohr's model violates it, right? Bohr's model violates uncertainty principle. Right? Bohr's model actually violates uncertainty principle because Bohr's model actually fixes the orbit, right? We definitely know the r. It says that you can find the electron in this orbit which is r distance away, right? So this is not in acceptance with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and as we have seen that in Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, in theory also you cannot find, right? So it is accepted that Bohr's model was not correct enough, right? And at this point Schrödinger came into picture, right? Schrödinger, right, intuitively proposed that he thought that what if that if electron has wave property as de Broglie has suggested, he thought that let us say the wave is something like this, fixed, right? Because electron is not going anywhere out of the atom. Suppose there is a string, right, which is fixed here in these 2 points, and now if you just pull it here and leave it, what will happen? It will vibrate. It can vibrate like this, right? It can vibrate like this, it can vibrate like this also, right? So this will give what? These are examples of standing wave, right? Standing waves. So Schrödinger actually selected the standing wave equation for an electron in an atom, right? There are rigorous mathematics behind it, but we'll limit our discussion to minimal mathematics, right? So we'll just start with the standing wave equation. Now why it is happening like that? Okay, now let's say this standing wave equation, you can find it any physics book in sound chapter. If you see in higher secondary physics or degree physics, if you go to a chapter of the acoustics, sound, you will find this kind of equation for standing waves. The derivation is there, I am not going into it, right? Right? I think you have seen equations like this, right? This is the equation of a standing wave. Okay, so Schrödinger applied this to the electron, right? Where psi, this is pronounced as psi, is a function of x, and this is the lambda, that is the associated wavelength of that electron. Now if you do the derivative, right, let's say with respect to x, what will you have? This a is a constant, so it will be here. So 2 pi is again a constant, 2 pi comes out here, so cos of 2 pi x by lambda, right? Now if you do the second derivative of it with respect to s, then you have, so a is constant again, so it will be 2 square, that is 4 pi square sine 2 pi x by lambda, and there will be a negative sign here, right? Okay, that means what? If you just rearrange it, minus 4 pi square, have I missed anything else? Oh yeah, I have missed one. Here there will be lambda also, and here, so it will be lambda square. Okay, so it will be lambda square. Okay, now a sine 2 pi x by lambda, what is it? This is again psi, right? This is nothing but this part and this part is nothing but psi together, so you can put psi here. That means we have psi square dx square equals to minus 4 pi square by lambda square psi. Okay, now let's go, you can write it down. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Now okay, let me rewrite it again, psi by dx square equals to minus 4 pi square by lambda square psi. Now from de Broglie's equation, lambda equals to what? H by P, that is momentum, that means H by m into V. So if you replace this, that means lambda square equals to H square by m square V square. If you replace this here in this equation, you have minus 4 pi square m square V square by H square multiplied by psi. Okay. Again, see, half of m into V square equals to the kinetic energy. So let us put it as K. So if you have, you can do by simple manipulations 8 pi square m. So that means I am taking 2, dividing it by 2 and multiply it by the numerator by 2 also. So 8 k by H square psi. Okay, clear? Or you can say square minus, sorry, minus no, it's now, it will be plus if I take it this side, 8 pi square m k by H square psi equals to 0. Now K is what? K is kinetic energy, that means total energy E minus potential energy V. So this is potential energy and this is total energy. Okay, E minus V. So you can put, therefore square plus 8 pi square m E minus V by H square equals to 0. Yeah. Okay. So this is called the Schrodinger equation. So this is our Schrodinger equation. I am writing it AC of a particle of mass m, right, in one dimension, right? Till now we haven't used any 3 dimension or other dimension than x. So this is the Schrodinger equation of the particle of mass m in one direction. Okay, so in 3 dimension, now psi is function of x, y and z, right? So we do not have to derive it again, right? In same way we can do this, just the final form we have to derive it, we have to write it like this. So plus 8 okay, so this is in 3 dimension. Okay. So if in exam or test it is asked that write down the Schrodinger equation, so it either it will be mentioned in 1 dimension or 3 dimension, right? So write it accordingly. If it is asked that if it is right for 3 dimension, then only write this equation. If it is for 1 dimension in a box or something like that, then do not write this one, write the previous equation which I have shown. right? So only the equation with x. Okay, now there are several forms of Schrodinger equation which will see today. Okay, see, if you just rewrite it like this, suppose I write it, say okay, so what is this? In some question paper or books you may find that Schrodinger equation is written like this, right? So what is this? This is nothing called, this is the Laplacian operator, right? Where this Laplacian operator is equivalent to okay, so this is our Laplacian operator. Laplacian operator is denoted by the inverted del function, right? Inverted delta, and a square is there, right? Mind it. So there may be MCQs that of different symbols, which is the Laplacian operator. So you must be able to do it now. Okay. Now there are even more forms of Schrodinger equation. Let's write this one again, right? Suppose say okay, so in quantum mechanics we can write it like this. The previous equation I am rewriting it, right? Okay, let me write it again. Okay, now let me write it plus or say okay equals to minus 8 pi square m okay. Now we can write h square by 8 pi square m, right? If I write it, sorry, I do not write it here. I am just writing the Laplacian operator. So working on psi and giving psi. With simple manipulations you can do this, right? Now this, you see, you have an operator here which is working on psi, giving the total energy E, and the product with is the wave function again, right? So this is again an operator working on psi, giving a value that is the total energy E, multiplied by with the function itself. This kind of operators we'll learn it in next class in details. You might know that eigenfunctions and eigenvalues, we'll learn it, right? Now this operator is called the Hamiltonian operator, right? This is called the Hamiltonian operator, right? And you may write the equation as so this is the Hamiltonian form of Schrodinger equation, right? So in Schrodinger equation you have seen the Laplacian form, the normal form, one dimensional, three dimensional, and this is the Hamiltonian form of Schrodinger equation. And which is the Hamiltonian operator? This is the Hamiltonian operator, that is minus h square by 8 pi square m, and the Laplacian operator plus the potential energy operator, right, is called the Hamiltonian operator, right? This is the Hamiltonian operator, or is also called the total energy this operator, right? So this is either you call it total Hamiltonian operator or total energy operator, because when it acts on the wave function, it gives the total energy of the system, right? Okay, operators in quantum mechanics are nothing but like our plus, minus, division, multiplications in normal arithmetics, right? What we do, suppose a log, right? Log itself does not have any meaning. When it acts on something, then only it gives us a value, right? So addition, division itself, it does not carry any meaning. When it acts on something or a number, then only we get some values. So operators are in quantum mechanics are such things which acts on wave functions or any functions as in general to give some definite values, right? Okay, so today we have learned about mainly about de Broglie's wavelengths and this Heisenberg uncertainty principle, the theory behind it, right, and for whom it is applicable. And from those to this Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and mainly through the help of de Broglie's equation and standing wave equation, which we have learned it from physics, we have derived what Schrodinger equation in one dimension, and also we have written it in three dimension, and we have also seen what is Laplacian operator and Hamiltonian operator. So Hamiltonian form and Laplacian form of Schrodinger equation we have also learned. Now the main point is, suppose in exam it is asked write down the Schrodinger equation, you will just write it down stating its meanings. Meanings means when you write down, say suppose this equation, right, the Schrodinger equation, what you will write down its meaning? Then you have to write that where m equals to the mass of the particle, h is the Planck constant, E is the total energy, V is the potential energy, and all that, right? And x is the wave function of which is a function of x, y, z. So this is what you have to write. But if it comes derive it, then only you derive it from the standing wave equation, right? Other than you do not have to derive it. You just have to write it down. Okay, you do not have to derive it if it is just asked that write down the Schrodinger equation. Okay, so next day we will see what is the significance of psi, right? Can any function act as a good wave function? What is called a well behaved wave function? All these things we will discuss in the next lecture. Okay,